From Hollywood, this is Kasem. Speaking of Hollywood, here's a song about the young people who live on the streets of Hollywood. A song about children who've run away from abuse, children who have no homes. Debuting at number 34, Richard Marx with Children of the Night.
We are the children of the night.
Richard Marx with the 5th top 40 hit from his number 1 album, Repeat Offender.
Number 19.
Climbing 4 notches is the song Richard Marx wrote about teenage runaways who are working to straighten out their shattered lives. Some of those kids even got a chance to sing background vocals on this song.
This is American Top 40. I'm Shadoe Stevens. And now we're up to a song that's raising money for a special organization. It's the latest hit written and performed by Richard Marx. And this one was inspired by an organization called Children of the Night. Richard told us about it.
I'd heard about this organization that has been trying to raise money to build shelters for runaway kids. It's based in L.A., but it would really affect kids pretty much all over the country. And I thought it would make it was a great idea for a song. And so I got in touch with the people that run the organization, and they hooked me up with one of the kids in the program just so that I could talk to her and really know what I'm talking about, because I had a great childhood. You know, I mean, I played baseball, and I had my music, and a great relationship with my folks. I didn't have to deal with any of this kind of garbage. So after talking to this young girl about her life, it became very clear what the song needed to be about. And then I had a bunch of these kids from the street come in and sing on the song, and I said, you know, if the song gets to become a single, you know, I'll give you guys the royalties from the single.
Well, the whole project turned into a gathering of family and friends.
Yeah, well, what I did was when the record was all done, I wanted a choir to sing the very end of the song. And so I brought in 10 guys and 10 girls that are in the Children of the Night program. And then I added to them friends of mine who are singers. Kevin Cronin from REO Speedwagon, Larry Gatlin and the Gatlin Brothers from Nashville, and my mom sang, and my wife sang. So it was really kind of fun.
All the money made from the sales of the single are being donated to the organization.
Casey's Top 40.
I'm Casey Kasem, counting down the biggest hits in the USA. Now, we're up to the latest hit from Richard Marx and the story of how Richard wrote the song in order to rescue some young people from a hell on earth. Richard got the idea for this song one Sunday night while watching 60 Minutes on TV. They were reporting on an organization called Children of the Night. It's a group that helps teenage runaways in Southern California, and it was founded in 1979 by a woman named Lois Lee. Richard was horrified as he listened to Lois talking about the young people Children of the Night tries to help. Most are girls who have been molested at home. They run away to escape and wind up alone on the streets of Hollywood. All too often, they get involved in a terrible life of drugs and prostitution. Lois says she often gets calls from these girls, calls that say simply, "It's getting late, and I'm scared." Children of the Night tries to help by offering counseling and medical services. Sometimes they even find a place for the runaways to sleep. But that's difficult since the organization does not have a shelter of its own. After watching all this on TV, Richard Marx couldn't get Children of the Night out of his head. He contacted Lois Lee, and she introduced him to one of the teenage girls she'd been trying to help. That girl told Richard her terrible story of what happened to her after she ran away from her mother and father who didn't love her. She lived in condemned buildings, had been sold into prostitution, had been beaten up by street thugs, and that terrible ordeal had begun when she was just 10 years old. By the time the girl had finished telling Richard her story, both of them were in tears. Richard went away and began to write a song. The song came out sad and angry, yet at the same time hopeful, yet defiant. Richard recorded that song for the album Repeat Offender, and he's donating all of his publishing royalties from the song to help Children of the Night build that shelter it needs to get runaways off the street.
Casey's biggest hits.
2 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by Richard Marx, a song that's raised more than $100,000 to help teenage runaways begin new lives. It's a song that singer Richard Marx wrote and recorded to help an organization in Los Angeles. He became involved with that charity when he saw teenage runaways sleeping in doorways in Hollywood. Richard found out that there was a group that helped runaways, but they were broke. The city had no money to fund them. And so Richard decided to help. He spoke to some of the runaways, and he turned their story into a song that he donated to this good cause. A song that became one of the biggest hits in the USA 2 years ago this week.
Casey's Top 40.
Now we're up to the latest hit for Richard Marx, a singer who dedicated all the royalties from one of his recent hits to help teenagers in trouble. It was in 1989 that Richard Marx wrote and recorded the song. He'd been inspired to create it after noticing teenage runaways sleeping in alleys and doorways around Hollywood. Richard looked into the situation and discovered there was a charitable organization called Children of the Night that tried to help those runaways. But the organization was flat broke. So Richard wrote a song called Children of the Night to help them, not just by raising consciousness about the plight of teenage runaways, but also by pledging all his earnings from the song to the group. Well, in 1990, that song became a hit and it earned $250,000 for Children of the Night. Then more money was raised from benefits put on by rockers like Ozzy Osbourne, Damn Yankees, Winger, Quiet Riot, and heavy metal guitarists Ronnie James Dio and Don Dokken. In the end, $2 million was raised for Children of the Night, and just a few weeks ago, that $2 million was on display in the form of a new shelter for teenage runaways. The facility was built inside a former post office, and it's already attracted dozens of runaways, rescuing them from tragic lives of prostitution and drug addiction on the streets of Hollywood. This week, a major force behind that effort to help troubled youth climbs a notch to number 13 on Casey's Top 40.
American Top 40.
Remember Richard Marx's song a few years ago, Children of the Night? He wrote it as a benefit for the Children's Homeless Shelter organization here in L.A. called Children of the Night. And recently, Richard gave them a check for the publishing royalties, and it was $250,000. That ought to help.
Casey's biggest hits.
5 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was by Richard Marx, a song that helped build a counseling center for teenage runaways in Los Angeles. I'll have details and that big hit after this.
Casey's biggest hits.
5 years ago this week, one of the biggest hits in the USA was a song that helped build a counseling center for teenage runaways in Los Angeles. It was a center for a group that Richard Marx first learned about, talking with runaways who showed up to watch him film some of his first videos. He discovered that these teens lived a tough life on the streets, and just about the only hope they had came from the volunteers who worked for a group called Children of the Night. When Richard discovered that the group was low on funds, he wrote a song about what they do and pledged the royalties from the song to the organization. And they made enough money to pay off their debts and build a new center to help the many runaways who head for Hollywood. 5 years ago this week, that song was one of the biggest hits in the USA. Here's Richard Marx with Children of the Night. From 5 years ago, Richard Marx and Children of the Night. I'm Casey Kasem.
Casey's Coast to Coast.